The wagon stopped where the street narrowed, the wheels sinking slightly into the ruts as if unsure they belonged there. Eliza stepped down before anyone offered a hand. The driver passed her trunk after her, already looking past her toward the open land beyond the buildings. The town was smaller than she expected, fewer structures, more gaps. Wood weathered to a dull gray, doors hung a little crooked. People watched without pretending not to, no one waved. A few nodded, measuring her weight, her coat. The way she stood, she adjusted her gloves, then removed them when she realized how that looked. Her hands were pale and empty. A man crossed the street toward her. He was taller than the others she'd seen, his stride unhurried but certain. A gun rode low at his hip, worn smooth where a hand had rested 1,000 times. He took off his hat when he reached her. "Eliza Hartwell," he said, not asking. She nodded. "Caleb Moore." He smiled, quick and restrained, as if aware of who might be watching. "You made good time." "I didn't have much choice." That earned a quieter smile. He took her trunk without comment, testing the weight, then carried it toward a building with a porch that sagged in the middle. She followed, matching his pace. People shifted as they passed. A few words moved through the air behind them, low and unfinished. They were halfway across the street when another wagon rolled in from the east. It was cleaner than most, its sides freshly planed. 2 men rode it. A third walked alongside, boots polished, coat buttoned despite the heat. He raised a hand. "Caleb Moore." Caleb stopped. Eliza stopped with him. The street seemed to hold its breath. "Yes," Caleb said. The man stepped closer. He unfolded a paper, smoothing it carefully, as though the act itself carried weight. "By order of the territorial authority, you're required to come with us." "For what reason?" Caleb asked. "Administrative matters." The man said. "Questions regarding jurisdiction." "That's vague," Caleb said. "It's sufficient." Caleb glanced at Eliza, not long enough to explain anything, just long enough to register that she was there, that this was happening in front of her. "How long?" he asked. The man folded the paper again. "As long as it takes." Caleb looked down the street. No one moved. A few men stood near the hitching posts, hands resting where tools or weapons might be. No one spoke. He nodded once. "Let me set the trunk inside." "That won't be necessary," the man said. Caleb hesitated. Then he placed the trunk at Eliza's feet. He took off his hat and held it, then seemed to think better of it and put it back on. "I'll return," he said to her. His voice was even. "Stay with Thomas Reed. He'll see you settled." She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. The men closed in, not touching him, just narrowing the space until there was nowhere else to stand. Caleb walked with them to the wagon. He climbed up without help. The wagon turned back the way it had come. The street exhaled. People shifted. Someone laughed, too loudly, and then stopped. Eliza stood where he'd left her. The trunk sat upright, its corners scuffed from travel. She bent to pick it up and found she couldn't lift it alone. Thomas Reed approached, wiping his hands on his apron. "Miss Hartwell," he said, "you can leave that. We'll get it." "Thank you." Her voice sounded thinner than she expected. Inside the building, the air was cool and smelled faintly of flour and soap. Thomas set the trunk against the wall. "You're welcome to stay here," he said. "Room upstairs. For now." "For now." She repeated. He nodded, already turning back toward the door. "It'll sort itself out." Left alone, she sat on the edge of the bed. The boards creaked beneath her. Outside, the sounds of the town resumed, a hammer striking wood, a horse snorting, voices rising and falling without urgency. As evening came on, a woman knocked and brought a plate of food. She didn't sit, she didn't ask questions. Another woman followed later with extra blankets, her eyes lingering too long on Eliza's face. That night, Eliza lay awake listening to boots on the porch below. She told herself it was routine, that men walked at night here. That order had reasons she didn't yet understand. In the morning, the street looked the same. The ruts hadn't filled in, the buildings hadn't shifted, but the space Caleb had occupied remained empty, as if marked. By midday, the wagon had not returned. By evening, someone asked Thomas who was handling security now. By nightfall, Eliza understood that whatever had taken Caleb away had done so cleanly enough that no one knew how to pull him back. Thomas Reed unlocked the store before sunrise. the key catching in the swollen wood. He leaned into the door until it gave, then stepped inside and closed it behind him. The bell above the frame rang once. Too loud in the quiet, he lit the lamp on the counter and stood there a moment, listening. Nothing moved except the flame. By the time the first customer arrived, Thomas had already decided to keep things the same. Prices would hold, credit would still be offered, though he would note it more carefully. He told himself this as he arranged sacks of flour and jars of nails, aligning their edges as if order could be restored by attention alone. Silas Boone came in just after daylight. He didn't greet Thomas. He went straight to the counter and set down a small pouch that clinked when it hit the wood. "Need powder," Silas said, and shot. Thomas looked at the pouch. "How much?" "As much as you can spare." Thomas reached for the ledger, read it. Silas's jaw tightened. "You know I pay." "I know you usually do." Silas leaned forward. "Caleb always said." Thomas held up a hand. "Caleb isn't here." The words hung between them. Silas straightened, the tension shifting rather than easing. "I'll pay half now," Silas said. "The rest when things settle." Thomas nodded. He measured the powder carefully, more carefully than usual. When he slid it across the counter, he felt as though he were passing something heavier than it looked. After Silas left, two men came in together. They spoke in low voices near the shelves, glancing toward the door between sentences. They bought rope and salt, paid in full, and left without lingering. By mid-morning, Thomas had heard 3 different versions of why Caleb had been taken. None of them matched. He didn't correct anyone. A woman asked whether the patrol would still make its rounds that night. Thomas said he didn't know. She frowned, paid for her flour, and left more quickly than she'd come in. Near noon, one of the men from the east walked past the store window. He didn't look inside. He walked as if he knew where he was going. Thomas stepped out onto the porch. "Morning," he called. The man stopped. "Morning. You're staying a while." The man smiled faintly. "Depends on cooperation." Thomas nodded. "We aim to be cooperative." "I'm sure you do." When the man moved on, Thomas remained on the porch longer than necessary. He watched him speak with 2 townsmen near the well. He watched the way they listened. Inside, the store felt smaller. He moved the sacks of flour closer together, creating a narrower aisle. He told himself it made sense. He needed space near the counter. In the afternoon, Eliza Hartwell came down the stairs. She had changed her dress. The new one was plainer. She stopped at the bottom step as if unsure where to stand. "I was told to speak with you," she said. Thomas wiped his hands. "About what?" "About arrangements." He gestured to the counter. "You can stay upstairs as long as you need." She nodded. "And after?" He hesitated. "We'll see." She looked past him, toward the window. "Has there been word?" "No." She stood there, her hands folded, then unfolded them and folded them again. "If I could help here." "I don't think that would be wise," Thomas said. "People talk." Her mouth tightened. "They already are." He didn't answer that. Best to keep things simple. She nodded once, as if agreeing with something she hadn't said. After she went back upstairs, Thomas adjusted the sign in the window, straightening it though it hadn't moved. He felt the first stirrings of irritation, sharp and unwelcome. It passed when the bell rang again. As evening approached, a small group gathered near the store, not enough to call a meeting, enough to make the space feel watched. Thomas recognized the look, people waiting to see who would speak first. He stayed inside. When the sun dropped low, Thomas closed the door earlier than usual. He barred it and stood with his hand on the wood, listening to voices outside. They weren't raised. That was worse. At home, he ate alone. He counted his stock by memory and found gaps where none should be. He told himself it was only perception. Before bed, he wrote a note in the ledger beside Silas's name. Not a debt, a reminder. Lying in the dark, Thomas considered the ways he might protect himself. He thought of offering storage to the men from the east. He thought of refusing credit altogether. Each option felt like a narrowing path. By morning, he knew he would choose neither. He would continue as he had, adjusting in small ways that could be explained. He slept poorly, and when he woke, the sense of standing between 2 edges had settled in his chest, firm enough that he understood it would not lift on its own. Martha Doyle noticed the change before she could name it. It showed in how people paused at thresholds, how conversations adjusted when someone else entered the room. The town had learned to watch itself. She was mending by the window when the first knock came. It was light, almost polite. She set the needle aside and opened the door to find Mrs. Halpern standing with a basket held too carefully. "I won't stay," Mrs. Halpern said. "Just thought you might need these." Inside the basket were eggs, a small sack of dried beans. Martha stepped aside to let her in. "They're for the girl," Mrs. Halpern said, lowering her voice once the door closed. "It's not right, her being alone up there." "She isn't alone," Martha said. "Thomas is there." Mrs. Halpern pursed her lips. "You know what I mean." Martha took the basket. "People are being kind. They're being careful." Martha didn't respond. She set the basket on the table and poured water into 2 cups. "Mrs. Halpern didn't drink, I heard," Mrs. Halpern said. "That one of those men checks on her." Martha looked up. "Which man?" Mrs. Halpern shrugged. "One of the ones from the east. Makes sense, I suppose. Someone has to." "Who told you that?" Mrs. Halpern hesitated. "It was said." Martha nodded once. "That's how things start." When Mrs. Halpern left, Martha stood at the window longer than necessary. She watched Eliza Hartwell cross the street below, her head down, her steps measured. No escort, no sign of distress. Martha told herself that meant nothing. Later that afternoon, Martha walked to the well. She greeted the women there, accepted their nods. The talk was ordinary at first. Weather, stores, the delay in shipments. Then someone said, "It's not right him gone like that." Another replied, "It's not right her staying." Martha drew water, careful not to spill. "She has nowhere else to go." "She could leave," someone said. "And go where?" Martha asked. There was a pause. The bucket creaked as it was pulled up. "I don't mean harm," the woman said. "But things happen. People talk." Martha replaced the bucket and wiped her hands on her apron. "Then perhaps people should mind their words." The woman met her gaze. Perhaps someone should mind the situation. That evening, Martha lit the lamps earlier than usual. She sat with her sewing untouched, listening to the sounds outside. A horse passed. Voices rose and fell. Once laughter broke out and stopped abruptly. She thought of Caleb Moore, of how order had felt when he stood at the edge of things. She had not always agreed with him, but she had trusted the shape of the town around him. Now that shape had softened. The next morning, Martha visited Thomas Reed's store. She waited until the room was empty. "You should speak to her," Martha said. Thomas frowned. "About what?" "About propriety." Thomas sighed. "She hasn't done anything." "That's not the point." He leaned against the counter. "What would you have me do?" "Make it clear she's under protection," Martha said, not open to interpretation. Thomas hesitated. That could invite more talk. "So can silence." He rubbed his temple. "I'm trying to keep things calm." Martha's voice hardened. "Calm for whom?" Thomas didn't answer. On her way out, Martha nearly collided with Eliza at the door. They stepped aside at the same time, then stopped, awkward. "Mrs. Doyle," Eliza said. "Miss Hartwell." Eliza held a small parcel. "I was told you might need this." Martha took it. "Thank you." Their hands brushed briefly. Eliza's were cold. "You're managing?" Martha asked. Eliza nodded. "As best I can." Martha studied her face. She saw no shame there, no boldness either, only restraint. "People notice restraint," Martha said. "They don't always respect it." Eliza's mouth tightened. "What would you have me do?" Martha paused. She thought of all the answers she might give, of how each would shape the girl into something easier to understand. "Be careful," she said instead. That afternoon, Martha heard the rumor again. This time it had detail. Timing, a suggestion of obligation. She corrected it once, firmly. She corrected it again, softer. By the third time, she only listened. At supper, she spoke to no one about it. She told herself she had done what she could. That truth did not require shouting. Before bed, she stood at the window and watched the upstairs room where Eliza stayed. The lamp was lit, the curtain drawn. Martha told herself that appearances mattered because they protected everyone. That order required lines, even when they were uncomfortable. By morning, the town had learned a new version of the story, one that did not require proof, one that made sense of the unease. Martha understood then that her silence had not stopped the talk. It had given it room to settle, to take a shape that would be difficult to undo. Silas Boone kept the pouch of powder under his coat as he walked, like it could feel the eyes on it. The morning air was thin and cold enough to sting the lungs. The street was quiet, but quiet in a way that carried sound farther. He didn't go straight to the outskirts. He took the longer road behind the livery, past the back of the church where the boards were stacked and the ground was churned from last week's repairs. Habit. If he was watched, he preferred it to be for a reason he'd chosen. At the edge of town, he met the other two men where the scrub began. No handshakes, no talk about the weather, just nods and a look at the sky. "You got it?" one of them asked, eyes flicking to Silas's coat. Silas tapped his ribs. "Enough." They walked without speaking for a while, the distance between them widening and closing as the brush thickened. Silas kept his head down, scanning for disturbed ground, snapped stems, the kinds of small signs a person left without meaning to. They reached the cut by late morning. It wasn't much to look at unless you knew what to look for. A crease in the earth, a seam that caught light differently than the rock around it. They had covered their work as best they could. Branches laid, dirt scattered, the plainness of neglect. But the land had a memory, and so did the men who moved through it. Silas crouched. His fingers traced the edge of the concealment. The branches had been shifted, not much enough. "Wind?" one man said, quick, hopeful. Silas didn't answer. He peeled back a layer of brush underneath. The dirt was scraped in a new pattern. Not theirs. The third man, younger and less patient, exhaled hard. "Someone's been here." Silas's jaw tightened. He looked for tracks. There were none that would hold a boot print cleanly. But the stones had turned. A flat rock near the edge had been rolled and set back, not quite in the same place. A person could do that without knowing why it mattered. Could have been a hunter, the younger one said. Silas stood. He didn't like the way the younger man kept trying to shrink the problem into something manageable. He walked a slow circle around the site. 20 paces out, he found a broken twig caught high in a bush, where it didn't belong. He looked farther and found another, a line, careless and obvious once you saw it. His stomach tightened, not with fear exactly, but with the knowledge of how quickly a secret became a story. "Pack up," Silas said. The younger man frowned. "We just got here." "Pack up," Silas repeated. They did, hands moving faster than usual. Silas watched the tree line as they worked. The land was quiet again. That didn't help. On the way back, Silas kept thinking about Caleb Moore, not with affection, with irritation. The kind that came when something essential had been removed, and everyone pretended it was temporary. Caleb would have taken this seriously. Caleb would have put men on the trails. Caleb would have questioned the strangers in town until their polite papers turned to sweat. Now the town swallowed its questions because they were afraid of what asking would invite. As they approached the outskirts, Silas slowed. "No one speaks," he said, not looking at either of them. The older one nodded. The younger man hesitated. "We can't keep it quiet forever." The younger man said, "We're already short on." Silas cut him off. "Short on what?" "Everything," the younger man snapped, then checked himself. He looked away. "If we had a little money moving, maybe folks wouldn't be so." "So what?" Silas asked. "So they'd stop talking about the girl. So they'd stop looking for someone to blame." The older man cleared his throat. "Silas." Silas didn't look at him. "Money won't fix their mouths," Silas said. "It'll just give them something new to chew." Back in town, Silas went straight to Thomas Reed's store. He didn't want to, but the powder was a problem now. The more he carried, the more he risked. The bell over the door rang. Thomas looked up from his counter, eyes narrowing briefly, when he saw Silas. "You're back early," Thomas said. Silas kept his voice low. "We got a concern." Thomas's expression stayed neutral. "I have concerns too." Silas glanced around. 2 customers stood by the shelves pretending not to listen. A man he didn't recognize leaned against a crate near the door, hat tilted back, hands empty. His coat was clean. Silas didn't like clean. "We talk later?" Silas said. Thomas nodded as if he hadn't expected anything else. "Your powder's in the back." Silas moved toward the rear. passing close to the stranger. The man's eyes followed him. Calm as a man watching a dog cross a yard, in the back room, Silas checked the barrel where Thomas kept powder. The seal was intact, the weight felt right. He took what he needed, then paused. He could take more. He should take more. He didn't. When he returned to the front, Thomas was ringing up a customer. Silas waited, hands on the counter, feeling the wood's grooves under his palms. The stranger's gaze flicked down to Silas's hands, then back to his face. Thomas finished and turned to Silas. Anything else? Silas leaned in. Somebody's been near the cut. Thomas's face shifted slightly, not surprise, calculation. Are you sure? Thomas asked. Silas kept his voice flat. I don't speak unless I'm sure. Thomas nodded once, then looked toward the shelves as if checking who might hear. The two customers had drifted closer than necessary. The stranger still leaned where he was, a quiet anchor in the room. Thomas lowered his voice. Don't talk about it here. Silas forced himself to breathe through his nose. Where do you want me to talk? Church. Thomas's jaw tightened. I want you to not make it worse. Silas's irritation flared, sharp enough that it almost rose to his mouth. He swallowed it back. It's already worse. Thomas slid the powder toward him. Pay what you can. Silas reached for the pouch he carried. Inside were coins and, wrapped in cloth, a pinch of dust. He'd kept it separate, a habit from older digs. A way to prove to himself that this was real. He hesitated, then took out the coins only. He didn't need Thomas seeing the dust. He didn't need anyone seeing it. But the cloth caught on his fingernail as he shoved the pouch away. It snagged, and a few grains spilled onto the counter. Bright and wrong against the dark wood, Silas froze. Thomas's eyes dropped to the counter. His mouth didn't change, but his gaze sharpened. Behind Thomas, one of the customers went still. Silas scooped the grains with the edge of his thumb, pressing them into the cloth, quick and clumsy. The movement drew attention like a shout. The stranger by the door didn't move. He only shifted his weight slightly, as if getting a better angle. His eyes remained on the counter a moment too long. Thomas cleared his throat. That'll do. Silas shoved the pouch into his coat. It's nothing, he said. Too quickly, Thomas didn't reply. He pushed the powder and shot across the counter. Silas took it and turned for the door. As he stepped out, he heard a chair scrape. He didn't look back outside. The street looked ordinary. That was what made his chest tighten. Ordinary meant nobody would notice a man watching. Ordinary meant a story could begin without anyone admitting it had started. Silas walked fast, head down, the powder heavy under his coat. He told himself the spill had been small. He told himself no one had seen enough to matter. Behind him, inside Thomas Reed's store, the stranger bent as if to adjust his boot. His fingers brushed the floor near the counter, collecting what Silas had missed. He straightened slowly, dust hidden beneath his nail, and smiled in a way that didn't show his teeth. Jonas Pike washed his hands in a tin basin behind the boarding house, using less water than the landlady offered. He dried them on his own handkerchief, folded it, and placed it back in his pocket with the same care he used for papers. On the table inside his room lay a thin stack of writ with a seal, a ledger of names, and a blank sheet waiting to be filled. He sat, uncapped his ink, and wrote the date with a steady hand. A knock came at the door. 2 quick raps, then silence. Come, Jonas said. One of his men stepped in, hat in hand. He was younger, eager to please, quick to speak when nerves got hold of him. Word from town. The man said, Reed's store saw something. Jonas didn't look up. Define something. The man hesitated. Gold dust. Small. A miner had it on him. Spilled a bit on the counter. Folks saw. Jonas set the pen down. Who is folks? 2 customers. And me if that counts. I was by the door. Jonas's eyes lifted then, mild and attentive. Did you collect it? The man nodded, pulling his hand back as if feeling the grit under his nail again, just enough to know it wasn't dirt. Jonas's face remained still. Did you speak of it? No, sir. Good. Jonas rose and buttoned his coat. We do not move on rumor. We move on procedure. He walked out into the morning with 2 men behind him. They didn't carry rifles openly. Their pistols were present but not displayed. Their clean coats and quiet steps did more work than steel ever could. The The town met them with the same watchfulness it had offered the girl when she arrived. Jonas felt it as a pressure on skin, not hostile, simply assessing. He let it happen. A town that watched could be trained to watch the right things. At the well, women drew water without stopping, men stood apart, hands resting on belts, on pockets, on nothing at all. Jonas headed for the store with the bell that always rang too loud. Thomas Reed looked up as Jonas entered, his expression steadying as if he had already decided to be steady. Jonas respected that kind of choice. It made a person predictable. Jonas said, "Sir." Thomas replied. Jonas set his hat on the counter. "I understand you've seen something unusual." Thomas's eyes flicked once toward the shelves, where two townsmen browsed slowly. Eliza Hartwell was not present. Jonas noted that too. "I see a lot of things," Thomas said. "People come through, buy what they need." Jonas nodded, as if that answer satisfied. He reached into his coat and produced a folded paper. Not the writ, but something simpler. An announcement drafted on plain stock. "As you know," Jonas said, voice measured, "your town lies within a territory still under consolidation. Weak institutions invite confusion. Confusion invites harm." Thomas's mouth tightened. He didn't argue the premise. He didn't have to. Jonas held the paper out. "We're instituting a temporary registry for powder and shot. Not to limit lawful trade. To account for it. You will record quantities and purchaser names." Thomas stared at the page. "That's not standard. Standard comes after stability," Jonas said. "This is temporary." "How long is temporary?" Jonas's gaze stayed soft. "As long as it takes." One of the men near the shelves shifted, a small sound of boots against wood. Thomas's eyes moved to him, then back to Jonas. "You want me to turn my customers into entries?" Thomas said. "I want you to help prevent accidents." Jonas replied. "There's been increased tension. A registry reassures the peaceable." Thomas swallowed. "If people refuse." Jonas tilted his head slightly. "Then you'll note refused. That tells us where fear lives." Thomas's jaw worked, but he nodded once. It was compliance shaped like choice. Jonas placed the paper on the counter and set a pencil beside it. "Begin today." As Jonas turned, he let his eyes drift briefly across the counter, the wood's dark surface. He did not need to see grains of gold. He needed to see the way Thomas's fingers hovered near the place where something had been cleaned too carefully. Outside, Jonas moved through the street as if it belonged to no one, which made others step aside. He did not order them to. He let their own sense of consequence teach them. At the boarding house, he wrote a second notice, then a third. The language stayed simple: temporary measures, safety, jurisdiction, cooperation. Each word was chosen for its dullness. Dull words were hardest to fight. They gave no clear enemy. By midday, his men posted the notices on the church door and the store porch. Jonas watched from across the street, hands folded behind his back. He watched the crowd gather. Not large but tight. He watched faces tilt toward the paper, lips moving as they read. A man scoffed. Another hushed him. Jonas stepped forward then, not into the crowd, but close enough that his voice could carry without effort. "These are not punishments," Jonas said. "They are precautions. No honest man has cause to fear accounting." Someone muttered, "What about our own patrol?" Jonas's gaze found the speaker. "Your previous arrangement was informal. Informal arrangements fail under strain." The speaker's shoulders squared. "We kept peace fine." Jonas nodded once, acknowledging the claim without granting it. Peace kept by one man is not peace. It is dependence. The crowd stilled at that. Jonas let it settle. He did not push further. When the crowd dispersed, Jonas's man, still eager, still quick, approached. "You'll want to speak with Silas Boone," he said quietly. "He's the miner." Jonas's eyes remained on the church door. "Not yet. Why not? We could." "We could what?" Jonas asked, turning his head slightly. The man stopped himself. "Question him." Jonas's tone stayed even. Questioning invites resistance if done without warrant. "We build warrant." He walked toward the edge of town. Where the trail began, he did not go alone. He took two men spaced out, as if they were simply out for air. They reached the rise where the land opened, where a person could see the tracks that led east and west. Jonas knelt, picked up a stone, and turned it in his fingers. The ground here held little, but it held enough: a boot scuff, a hoof mark. a place where dust had been disturbed. He stood and looked back at the town. It looked small from here. Smaller towns made sharper decisions. They did not have room for long disputes. That worked in his favor. On the way back, he stopped near the livery. A pair of men were talking. They quieted as Jonas approached, then tried to look casual. Jonas smiled faintly. "Gentlemen." One of them nodded. "Sir, I'm appointing 2 temporary deputies," Jonas said, as if discussing a fence repair, "men from your community, for cooperation." The men exchanged quick glances. "Who?" one asked. Jonas's gaze held them. "Men who can be trusted to keep calm. Men who understand that stability is everyone's business." He did not name anyone, not yet. Leaving a name blank made every man consider himself. And every other man, back at the boarding house, Jonas wrote another paper. This one bore a seal. He signed it, then sanded the ink to dry. In the late afternoon, Thomas Reed appeared at Jonas's door, hat in hand, face drawn with the strain of acting calm all day. Jonas invited him in. "Mr. Reed." Thomas held the registry notice, folded and refolded until the creases were sharp. "People are upset." Jonas nodded. "Upset is not violence. It can lead to it." Jonas's eyes met his. "That's why we account." Thomas's voice lowered. "You're turning the town inward. Folks are watching each other." Jonas's expression did not change. They should. When institutions are weak, vigilance becomes the institution. Thomas swallowed, and Caleb more. Jonas set his hands flat on the table, palms down, a gesture of patience. "Mr. Moore is in lawful custody. Questions will be addressed in time." Thomas's shoulders sagged a fraction. "You understand he was the one who held things together." Jonas watched him a moment. "Then it is better he was removed before your town discovered what it is without him." Thomas stared at Jonas as if he had measured. Jonas did not soften the statement. He did not need to. Thomas left without another word. After he was gone, Jonas opened the ledger of names and added a new column beside each compliant, resistant, uncertain. He did it with a steady hand, as if he were merely taking inventory. When the sun set, a bell rang from the church, slow and deliberate. People gathered again to read the notices under lamplight, their shadows overlapping on the wood. Jonas watched from his window until he saw Thomas Reed place a pencil beside the new registry page, then open the store door for the first customer of the evening. The pencil's first mark on paper was small, ordinary. It was also irreversible. Eliza woke to the sound of chalk on wood. Downstairs, Thomas Reed was writing, the strokes steady and dry. The bell above the door rang once as someone entered, then again as the door swung back. She lay still for a moment, listening to voices, to the pause that followed each question, the careful way answers were given. When she finally rose, she dressed in the plainest thing she owned and braided her hair tight. She moved quietly down the stairs, her hand brushing the railing as if it could keep her steady. Thomas stood behind the counter with a sheet of paper laid flat beside the ledger. A pencil rested near his right hand. He looked up when he heard her steps, then looked down again, as if meeting her eyes too long might invite questions. "Morning," he said. "Morning," she replied. A man she didn't recognize stood near the shelves. He held a box of nails as though weighing its value, but his gaze kept returning to the counter. Another man waited by the door, hat low, hands in his pockets. Eliza went to the stove and poured water into the kettle without speaking. Her hands did not shake, but she felt every movement. The first customer brought flour to the counter and asked, "What's that paper?" Thomas's voice stayed even. "Registry." "For what?" Thomas said. He tapped the page, name and quantity. The man laughed once without humor. "Since when?" "Since yesterday." Thomas said. The man's eyes flicked to Eliza as if she had been part of the answer. Eliza kept her face turned toward the stove. "Fine," the man said. "Give me £2. Thomas wrote the name. The pencil made that dry sound again. Eliza felt it in her teeth. When the man left, the second customer stepped up. He asked for rope, paid in coin, and didn't ask about the paper. But before he turned, his eyes went to Eliza, paused, then slid away as if he had touched something hot. As the morning wore on, the questions came in small, ordinary ways, not shouted, not public, the kind of talk that stuck to corners. "Is it true he's held by the territory?" Someone asked Thomas. That's what they say, Thomas replied, and the girl, someone else said, too casually, she's staying on. She's staying upstairs, Thomas said. A pause. A soft sound that could have been agreement, could have been doubt. Eliza poured coffee into a chipped cup and carried it to Thomas. She set it down and withdrew her hand quickly, as if even kindness could be misread. Thomas didn't thank her until the door closed behind the last customer. You don't have to do that, he said quietly. I can, she said. I should. He looked at her then, his eyes tired. It's not about should, Eliza. Her name sounded strange in his mouth, too familiar for what they were. She nodded anyway. Around noon, there was a knock at the back door. Not the front, 2 steady raps. Thomas stiffened. He set the pencil down and went to open it. Eliza stayed where she was, but she could see the back hall from the counter. Jonas Pike stepped in, hat in hand. His coat was buttoned neatly. Behind him, one of his men waited outside, visible through the doorway like a shadow that had learned to stand still. Mr. Reed, Jonas said. Voice mild. Thomas's shoulders squared. Sir. Jonas's gaze moved once, and in that single movement it took in Eliza. The stove, the stairs leading up. He didn't stare. That was worse. He treated her as part of the room. I came to see the registry is in place, Jonas said. It is, Thomas replied. He held the page up slightly, as if proof could satisfy without conversation. Jonas nodded. Good. Cooperation reduces misunderstandings. Thomas's jaw tightened. Anything else? Jonas's eyes returned to Eliza. Not direct but unavoidable. Miss Hartwell is staying here. Eliza felt the words as a hand placed lightly on her shoulder. Not touching. Claiming, said Jonas, folded his hands behind his back. It is wise to keep her accounted for. There's been tension. She hasn't caused any, Thomas said. Sharper than Eliza expected, Jonas's expression didn't change. Tension is not always caused. Sometimes it happens around a person, like wind around a fence. Eliza kept her face still. She didn't look at Thomas. She didn't look at Jonas. She stared at the kettle as if it required her full attention. Jonas stepped farther inside, his boots quiet on the boards. Your town has habits, he said. Habits without structure can become risky. Thomas's voice went low. What do you want? Jonas smiled faintly. Only safety. For everyone. Eliza's throat tightened. She understood then what safety meant in his mouth. It meant being visible when he wanted. It meant being where he expected. It meant that her movements could be interpreted as compliance or defiance. Jonas turned slightly toward the stairs. It would be better, he said, if Miss Hartwell did not wander. People take comfort in predictable things. Eliza forced herself to speak. I don't wander. Jonas's eyes settled on her. Calm. That is wise. The words landed like a seal on paper. When Jonas left, Thomas closed the back door harder than necessary. The sound echoed through the store. Eliza exhaled slowly. She hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath. He can't tell me where to go, she said. But it came out without heat. Thomas didn't meet her eyes. He can make it cost you, he said. The afternoon felt narrower. Eliza stayed inside. She folded linens that didn't need folding. She swept an already clean floor. Each time someone entered the store, she felt the small shift in attention, the way eyes checked whether she was where she was supposed to be. Near dusk, a woman came in for lamp oil. She lingered by the counter longer than the purchase required. You're doing all right up there? The woman asked, voice too gentle. Eliza nodded. The woman's gaze dropped to Eliza's hands. You been bothered? Eliza kept her expression smooth. No. The woman's mouth tightened, as if disappointed. Well, she said, that's good. Folks just worry. Eliza watched her leave. Worry was what they called it. When they wanted to know things they didn't have the right to ask. That night, Thomas barred the front door and extinguished the lamps. Eliza went upstairs and sat on the bed without undressing. The window showed only darkness and the suggestion of movement. From below, she heard the bell at the church ring once, then twice, not a call to worship, a signal slow and deliberate. She stood and pulled the curtain back a finger's width. In the street, a man stood beneath the porch light, not doing anything that could be named. He looked at the building, then away, then back again, as if counting. Eliza let the curtain fall. She climbed into bed fully clothed. By morning, she understood the new terms without anyone stating them aloud. Her safety was conditional, and the conditions were no longer hers to set. Abigail cross-scrubbed her hands until the water cooled and her skin reddened. She dried them on her apron, then reached for the bottle of alcohol and hesitated before setting it back on the shelf. She had learned to measure what she used. What she said required the same care. The boy on the cot had stopped coughing. That worried her more than the coughing had. She pressed her fingers lightly to his wrist and counted, her eyes on the wall so his mother wouldn't read her face. "He's resting," Abigail said. The woman nodded too quickly. "That's good." "It can be," Abigail said. She adjusted the blanket, smoothing it as if that might smooth the truth. "He needs water." Small sips. The woman reached for the cup with hands that shook. Abigail stepped back, giving her room. She didn't say what else she saw. The tightness in the boy's chest, the way his breathing paused before it continued. Naming those things wouldn't change them. It would only change the woman. Outside, voices passed the open window. A man laughed. Another told him to keep his voice down. Abigail closed the shutter and latched it. By midday, 3 more people had come through her door. A cut finger that needed cleaning. A fever she couldn't explain. A miner with a sore leg who asked if she'd heard about the registry. "It's for safety," Abigail said, because that was the language being used. "For whose?" he asked. She didn't answer. She wrapped his leg and sent him away with instructions he would follow. When the door closed, she leaned against it briefly, feeling the wood through her back. She told herself she was tired. That was true enough to hold. In the afternoon, Martha Doyle arrived without knocking. She didn't sit. Martha said. Abigail poured water into a cup and offered it. Martha waved it away. "I know," Abigail said. "Do you?" Martha's eyes were sharp. "I hear you see everyone. I see people who need tending. And what do you tell them?" Abigail set the cup down. "What they need to hear." Martha's mouth tightened. "That's a dangerous line. So is truth without mercy," Abigail said, more sharply than she intended. Martha studied her. "Are you saying I lack mercy?" "I'm saying fear spreads faster when fed." Martha exhaled through her nose. "Silence feeds it too." "Yes," Abigail said, "but not all at once." Martha left without agreeing. Abigail watched her go, then closed the door and slid the latch home. Later Thomas Reed came by. He stood awkwardly near the table, hat in his hands. "I need to ask you something," he said. Abigail waited. "Is it true?" he began, then stopped and started again. "That there's illness going around?" Abigail considered the room, the shelves, the clean bandages folded and refolded. "There's always illness," she said. "Is it worse now?" "Different," she said. Thomas nodded. "Because they're worried." "Yes." He shifted his weight. "Should I tell them to come see you?" Abigail hesitated. If too many came, she would be forced to say more than she wanted. If too few came, the wrong stories would take root. "Send them if they're hurt," she said. "Not if they're curious." Thomas smiled faintly, a tired expression. "Everyone's curious." Abigail didn't smile back. "Then tell them curiosity doesn't heal." After he left, she sat and wrote in her notebook, not names, just marks, days, symptoms, the way things changed when people watched each other too closely. As dusk fell, Eliza Hartwell appeared at the door. She stood on the threshold, not crossing until Abigail nodded. "I won't take long." Eliza said, "That's fine." Abigail replied. Eliza sat on the edge of the chair, hands folded in her lap. "I was told you might know," she said, then stopped. "Know what?" Eliza's eyes flicked to the shutter. "What people are saying." Abigail felt the familiar tightening in her chest. This was the moment she disliked most, where the truth waited, sharp-edged, and the lie waited too. Smooth and ready, they're talking. Abigail said. Eliza nodded. "Are they certain?" "No," Abigail said. "Certainty takes work." Eliza's shoulders eased a fraction. "Then it will pass." Abigail watched her carefully. "Not if it's useful." Eliza frowned. "Useful to whom?" Abigail didn't answer. She reached for a cloth and began folding it, though it was already folded. "You're being watched," she said. "Not for what you do. For what you might do." Eliza's mouth tightened. "I don't do anything. That's what makes it easy." Abigail said. Eliza stood. I should go. Yes, Abigail said, before dark. At the door. Eliza paused. If there were something I should know, she said, not turning around, you would tell me? Abigail closed her eyes briefly. Knowing would help you, she said. Eliza left without another word. Night brought a knock that was not gentle. Abigail opened the door to find one of Jonas Pike's men standing there, hat in hand. He said, Evening. Abigail replied, We're checking on health, he said, making sure no one's hiding anything that could spread. Abigail kept her voice steady. I treat what comes to me. Anyone unusual? He asked. Everyone is unusual, Abigail said. He smiled, thin. We'll need to know if that changes. After he left, Abigail bolted the door and stood with her back to it. Her hands trembled now. She let them. She went to the shelf and took down the bottle of alcohol. She used more than she needed, letting it sting. Pain was honest. It didn't pretend to help. Before bed, she opened her notebook again. She considered writing what she suspected. She did not. She added another mark instead, lying in the dark. Abigail understood the shape of the trap forming. Speak too much, and she would become a source. Say too little, and others would fill the space. By morning, she knew she would choose the smaller harm when she could, even if it meant carrying the rest herself. By the end of the week, Thomas Reed stopped listening for Caleb Moore's footsteps. The realization came to him one morning as he opened the store, and didn't glance toward the street out of habit. His hand went to the latch, the door swung wide, and the bell rang without him thinking of who might answer it if trouble followed. The absence had settled into the shape of routine. The registry lay open on the counter. The page was no longer clean. Names filled the lines in uneven hands. Some were careful, some defiant. A few entries read only, refused, written by Thomas himself after brief, tight conversations. He had stopped explaining. When Jonas Pike's men came by now, they didn't knock. They stood just inside the door, quiet, letting their presence do the work. Thomas continued measuring flour, continued counting change. He found that if he did not acknowledge them, neither did the customers. Everyone learned the rhythm quickly. By mid-morning, Silas Boone came in for rope. He did not ask for powder. You'll need to sign, Thomas said, tapping the registry. Silas stared at the page. For rope. Thomas hesitated, then shook his head. No bow. Silas nodded, relief or irritation hard to tell. Good. They stood there a moment longer than necessary, both of them aware of what had not been said. When Silas left, Thomas wrote nothing in the ledger. The blank space bothered him more than a refusal would have. Near noon, Thomas posted a new notice beside the old one. It wasn't required. That was the problem. It listed hours for trade, guidelines for disputes, a suggestion that disagreements be brought to him or the appointed authority. He read it twice after nailing it up. The words sounded reasonable. They sounded like something that had always been there. People gathered, read, and nodded. One man clapped Thomas on the shoulder. Good to have things clear, he said. Thomas smiled thinly. Clarity helps. Inside he felt the weight of what he had done settle into place. By naming himself a point of order, he had narrowed his options. Stepping back now would look like abandonment. In the afternoon, Eliza Hartwell came down the stairs carrying a basket of folded linens. She moved as if she knew where the edges were, careful not to cross them. I'll take these to Mrs. Halpern, she said. Thomas glanced toward the door. Best go straight there and back. I will. He watched her leave, noting how the street adjusted around her. Conversations dipped, eyes followed. She did nothing to invite it. That, too, had become part of the pattern. When she returned, she paused by the counter. She said, About what? About the notice. Thomas nodded, and they seem relieved. He exhaled slowly. Relief doesn't last. No, she agreed, but it changes what comes next. Later, Martha Doyle came in, read the notice, and said nothing. She bought lamp oil and paid in exact coin. You're taking on a lot, she said at the door. Someone has too, Thomas replied. Martha looked at him a moment longer. Just be sure you remember which parts are temporary. After she left, Thomas stood alone in the store. He imagined tearing the notice down. He imagined telling Jonas Pike that the town would manage its own affairs, Each thought ended the same way, with raised voices, with men choosing sides. With the fragile calm shattering, at dusk, one of Jonas's men stopped by and asked for the registry. Thomas handed it over without comment. The man flipped through the pages, nodded, and handed it back. Good cooperation, he said. Thomas locked the door that night with care. Upstairs, he could hear Eliza moving quietly. He did not call out to her. He did not need to. As he lay in bed, he counted the small choices he had made since Caleb's removal. None of them felt dramatic. Each had seemed sensible at the time. Together, they had built something solid enough that dismantling it would require force. By morning, the town would open its doors again. Trade would continue. Names would be written down. Disputes would be softened before they hardened. And if someone asked when Caleb Moore was coming back, Thomas already knew what he would say. Soon, he would tell them, because soon was a word that kept things moving, and stopping now felt like the greater risk. Caleb Moore came back on foot. He reached the rise above town just after midday, dust on his boots, his coat creased from being worn too long without rest. The town lay below him, familiar in outline and wrong in its details. A wagon stood where he did not remember one belonging. A notice hung crooked beside the store door. Catching the light, he stopped there longer than he meant to, taking in what he could see without moving closer. No one was running, no smoke, no sound that suggested immediate trouble. That, more than anything, unsettled him. When he walked down the road, the first man he passed nodded, then hesitated as if deciding whether more was required. Caleb nodded back and kept going. At the edge of town, a boy he recognized stared openly. "You're back," the boy said. Caleb nodded. "I am." The boy ran off without saying anything else. By the time Caleb reached the store, word had already moved ahead of him. He could feel it in the way doors were half opened, in the way people lingered a step longer than usual. Thomas Reed stood behind the counter. When Caleb pushed the door open, the bell rang. Thomas looked up, froze, then composed himself. "Caleb," he said. "Thomas." They stood facing each other, the counter between them like a line neither had agreed to draw. "You were gone," Thomas said, unnecessarily. "So I hear," Caleb replied. He glanced at the paper posted by the door. "What's that?" Thomas followed his gaze. "Registry." "Temporary." Caleb's eyes returned to Thomas's face. "Whose idea?" Thomas didn't answer right away. "Things changed." Caleb nodded once. "They always do." He looked around the store. The shelves were stocked, but unevenly. A few items were missing entirely. Others were stacked higher than before, as if someone had decided abundance needed to be visible. "And Eliza?" Caleb asked. Thomas's expression shifted, a fraction too slow to hide. "She's upstairs." "Is she well?" "Yes." Caleb held Thomas's gaze. "That wasn't the question I asked." Thomas exhaled. "She's managed." Caleb let that settle. He didn't press further. He understood the limits of what could be said here. He took the stairs two at a time. Eliza stood when she heard his boots. She had been folding linens. She stopped with a sheet half creased in her hands. "You're back," she said.
"Yes."
They stood facing each other, close enough that he could see the faint dark circles beneath her eyes, the tightness at the corners of her mouth. He reached for her, then stopped himself. He lowered his hand. "I'm sorry," he said. She shook her head. "You didn't choose it." "No," he said. "But I wasn't here." She nodded once. That was all the agreement she offered. From below, voices rose. Someone laughed. Someone else said his name, not loudly, but not quietly either. Caleb turned toward the window. "Who's in charge now?" Eliza hesitated. "No one." "And everyone." He almost smiled at that. Almost. They went downstairs together. The room felt smaller with him in it, as if his presence changed the measurements. Outside, a man stepped forward. "Good to see you back," he said. "Things have been steady." "Steady how?" Caleb asked. The man shrugged. "Orderly." Caleb looked past him and saw one of the men from the east standing across the street, arms folded, watching without expression. "So," Caleb said, "that's how." The man followed his gaze and shifted uncomfortably. "They've been helping." Caleb nodded. "At what cost?" No one answered. As the afternoon wore on, Caleb moved through the town. He did not take command. He listened. Each conversation revealed a small adjustment, a compromise made in the name of calm. Each one felt reasonable on its own. Together, they felt permanent. At the well, a woman stopped speaking when she saw him. At the livery, a man corrected himself mid-sentence. At the church, he saw the notices nailed beside the door, the language careful and dull. By evening, the town had gathered, not formally, but enough that Caleb found himself at the center of a loose circle. Someone asked when things would go back to normal. Caleb looked at their faces. He saw relief, yes, but also expectation. They wanted him to fit back into the shape they remembered, to make the choices they no longer wanted to make themselves. "I don't know," he said. The answer unsettled them more than a lie would have. That night, Caleb and Eliza sat in the room above the store. They spoke of small things, food, weather. What had broken while he was gone? They did not speak of rumors. When he lay awake later, listening to the town settle around him, Caleb understood what his absence had done. The town had learned to live without him. Now it was deciding whether it needed him back, or only the idea of him. He closed his eyes, knowing that whatever place remained for him would be narrower than the one he had left. Eliza woke before Caleb. He lay on his back, one arm across his chest, eyes closed but not soft, even asleep. He looked like a man listening. The room smelled of dust and old soap. Outside the window, the town was already moving in small, careful sounds. Eliza dressed quietly and went downstairs. Thomas had the store open. The registry lay on the counter like a second ledger no one wanted to acknowledge, but everyone watched. A customer stood near the stove with his hat still on. He wasn't buying anything. He was waiting for someone else to say something first. Thomas looked up when Eliza came down. His expression flicked to the stairs behind her, then back to the man at the counter. "Eliza," he said low. She nodded, took the kettle, and set water on to heat. Her hands moved with purpose because stillness drew attention. She felt eyes track her from the shelves. The man by the stove asked, too casually, "He's really back?" Thomas answered without looking up, "He's back. And things'll go back then." Thomas's pencil hovered over the registry. "Things don't go back," he said, and the man chuckled as if it were a joke. Eliza poured coffee into 2 cups and carried one to Thomas. She didn't offer it to the man by the stove. She didn't want a debt of any kind forming in public. When the front door opened again, the bell rang sharp. 2 women entered. One was Mrs. Halpern. The other Eliza didn't know well, only by face. Mrs. Halpern nodded to Eliza as if to prove kindness could still be shown. The other woman's gaze slid past her as if Eliza were part of the wall. They bought lamp oil and flour. When Thomas asked for a name for the registry, the unknown woman said it quickly, then added, "For oil too." Thomas shook his head, "Only powder and shot." "Good," the woman said, louder than needed, and her eyes cut to Eliza for the briefest moment. It wasn't a look of accusation. It was the look people gave when they wanted an answer from you without asking. After they left, Thomas exhaled, "They're restless." Eliza's throat tightened. "They've been restless." Thomas rubbed his temple. "Since he came back? It's different." Eliza knew what he meant. The town had been tense without Caleb because the gap made everyone feel exposed. Now that he was here, the tension shifted shape. It had an object again. By late morning, Caleb came down. He paused at the foot of the stairs, taking in the store, the registry, the notice on the wall, the way a man near the shelves stopped mid-motion when Caleb's boots hit the boards. Caleb's eyes moved to Eliza, not warm, not cold, just searching. Eliza held his gaze a moment, then looked away to the kettle. It was easier to pretend she was busy than to stand under that kind of attention. Caleb stepped to the counter. He said. Thomas straightened. "Caleb." Caleb tapped the registry page once with a knuckle. "How many refused?" Thomas swallowed. "Some." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Names." Thomas hesitated. "That's not how it's meant." Caleb's eyes lifted. "It's exactly how it's meant." The men in the store pretended not to listen. Their silence was a kind of listening. Caleb looked at Eliza again. This time longer. She kept her hands steady. She kept her face still. When the store cleared, Caleb went out. He didn't say where. He didn't ask Eliza to come with him. The door shut behind him, and Eliza felt the air change in the room, as if the building itself had tightened and loosened. She told herself it was nothing. Men did not explain every movement. They couldn't afford to. At midday, Eliza walked to Abigail Cross's place with a basket of clean cloth she kept to the center of the street, in full view, predictable, like Jonas Pike had wanted. Abigail opened the door before Eliza knocked, as if she'd been watching from inside. "You shouldn't be out alone," Abigail said. "I'm not alone," Eliza replied, glancing down the street where a boy sat on a barrel. The boy looked away quickly when their eyes met. Abigail took the basket and stepped aside. "Come in." Inside, the room smelled of boiled water and bitter herbs. A woman sat by a cot, eyes red, hands clasped around a cup. She didn't look up when Eliza entered. Eliza set her gaze on the basket instead. "I brought clean cloth." Abigail nodded. "Thank you." The woman by the cot finally looked up. Her eyes moved over Eliza's face, then down, then away. She did not greet her. Abigail's voice softened. "Not everyone has the strength to be polite right now." Eliza's mouth tightened. "I'm not asking for politeness." Abigail studied her. "Then don't ask for anything. Take what you can get." Eliza heard the edge in it. It wasn't cruelty. It was a warning. As she turned to leave, the woman by the cot spoke, quiet but sharp enough to land. "Some women come here for bandages," she said. "Some come here to hide things." Eliza stopped with her hand on the latch. She didn't turn around. Abigail's voice cut in, controlled. "Nuff." The woman said nothing more, but the damage had already been done. The sentence hung in the room like a stain. Outside, Eliza walked back toward the store with her shoulders tight. She told herself not to run. Running would confirm something. She kept her pace even. Halfway back, she saw Martha Doyle standing near the church notices, hands clasped in front of her, posture straight. Martha didn't wave. She waited until Eliza passed, then fell into step beside her as if it had always been their habit. "You're being careful," Martha said. Eliza kept her eyes on the road. "I was told to be." Martha's mouth tightened. "You were told by whom?" Eliza did not answer. Martha continued as if Eliza had. "Careful is not the same as clean," she said. "People confuse the two." Eliza felt heat rise behind her eyes. People confuse what they want to confuse. Martha's gaze stayed forward. "And if they've already chosen a story, correcting it makes you part of the story." Eliza stopped walking. Martha stopped too. A step ahead, then turned back. "You're warning me," Eliza said. "I'm telling you what I see," Martha replied. "If you're innocent, act innocent." Eliza's voice went flat. "What does that look like?" Martha held her gaze a moment, then looked away first. "It looks like not making anyone wonder." Eliza let out a breath that sounded too much like a laugh, and not enough like one. "Then I've failed already." Martha's lips pressed together. "Maybe." She walked off without another word. When Eliza reached the store, Caleb was back. He stood near the counter with Thomas, his posture stiff. Jonas Pike's clean, coated man was visible through the window across the street, standing as if he had nowhere else to be. Eliza stepped inside. The bell rang. Caleb turned. His eyes found her immediately, as if he had been waiting for the sound. Thomas excused himself, moving toward the back as though inventory suddenly needed attention. Caleb didn't speak at first. He looked at Eliza's face, then at her hands, as if searching for evidence of something he could name. "Where were you?" he asked. Eliza said. "For what?" "I brought cloth," she said. "I can do that." Caleb's jaw worked. He nodded once, but the nod didn't settle anything. Eliza set her basket down and faced him fully. "You've heard it," she said. Caleb's eyes narrowed. "Heard what?" She waited. The silence stretched, tight enough that she could hear the ticking in the stove. Caleb's voice dropped. "They're saying you were watched. Taken care of. By them." Eliza swallowed. "They watched. That part is true." Caleb's gaze held hers. "And the rest?" Eliza felt the room tilt. The question was not shouted. That made it heavier. It wasn't an accusation. It was a fear trying to find a shape. She could tell him about the back door knock, about Jonas Pike's calm voice, about the way safety had been spoken like a claim. She could tell him about the man under the porch light counting. She could tell him how she had stayed visible, because invisibility would have been worse. None of it would sound like purity. It would sound like bargaining. Even if she hadn't bargained, Eliza. Caleb said, quieter now. Did you give him anything?" Her throat tightened so hard it hurt. The truth was simple. The situation was not. She shook her head once. No. Caleb stared at her. He didn't relax. He didn't accuse her again. He only looked as if the answer had to cross too much distance to reach him. He turned away first, putting his hands on the counter, shoulders rigid. "Then why does everyone look at you like that?" Elisa's voice came out small despite her effort. "Because they needed something to hold while you were gone?" Caleb didn't answer. He stayed facing the counter, as if the wood could give him steadiness. Elisa stood behind him, close enough to touch him, and did not. When he finally spoke, it wasn't a verdict, it was worse. "Don't go out alone," he said. The words landed like Jonas Pikes had, months apart, but cut from the same cloth. Protection that sounded like control. Safety that came with terms. Elisa nodded because refusing would turn it into a fight she could not afford. Caleb picked up his hat. "I need air," he said, and left without looking back. Elisa remained in the quiet store, staring at the basket on the floor. She understood, with a clarity that made her chest ache, that the next time she tried to explain, it wouldn't be about facts. It would be about what those facts made him feel. And once a feeling took root, pulling it out would tear something with it. Martha Doyle decided it was time to speak plainly. She chose the morning for it, when people were most willing to believe that order could still be restored by the right words. She put on her dark shawl and walked to the church, where the notices hung in neat rows, and the steps had become a place for standing without declaring a purpose. A woman joined her there, then another. They did not greet one another. They read the notices again, though nothing had changed since the night before. "It isn't right," Martha said quietly but not privately. The woman nearest her nodded. "No, not right." Martha continued, "For a town to turn itself inside out because it's afraid to name what it sees." The second woman shifted. "What exactly do you see, Martha?" Martha looked at her. "I see disorder pretending to be mercy." That drew a few glances. A man lingered near the door longer than prayer required. "People have been patient." The first woman said, "That counts for something." "Patience isn't silence," Martha replied, "and silence isn't innocence." The words settled heavily between them. By mid-morning, the conversation had moved. It always did, from the church steps to the well, from the well to the store porch. By the time Martha reached Thomas Reed's place, she could feel the air shift when she approached, as if people were bracing. Thomas was behind the counter, the registry open, pencil resting beside it. He looked up when he saw her and did not smile. "You've been busy," he said. "So have you," Martha replied. Nodding at the page, Thomas closed the ledger halfway. "What do you want, Martha?" "I want clarity," she said. "And I want it spoken aloud." His mouth tightened. "About what?" "You know about what?" Thomas glanced toward the stairs, then back at her. "If you're here to stir things, I'm here to stop them from rotting." Martha cut in. A customer near the shelves pretended to examine nails. His interest was too careful. Martha lowered her voice. "This town has always had lines. We know how to live with them. We know what happens when they blur." Thomas's eyes hardened. "Be careful." "I am being careful," Martha said. "I'm choosing my words." "That doesn't make them harmless." She straightened. "If a thing can't be named without harm, then it's already doing damage." Thomas shook his head. "You're pushing people to choose sides." "People already have," Martha replied. "They just don't like admitting it." She left before he could answer, aware of the silence that followed her steps outside. She nearly collided with Abigail Cross. Abigail took her arm gently and steered her a few paces away. "You shouldn't be doing this," she said under her breath. "Doing what?" Martha asked, speaking as if certainty is kindness. Martha pulled her arm free. "I'm speaking as if standards still matter." "They do," Abigail said. "But not like this." Martha's eyes flashed. "And how would you have it?" "I would have people survive," Abigail said, "including the ones you're aiming at." Martha stiffened. "You think I'm aiming?" "I think you're standing very still and letting others aim for you." Martha's lips pressed together. "Someone has to hold the line." Abigail looked tired suddenly. "Lines move when the ground shifts." Martha watched her walk away, irritation simmering beneath her ribs. Abigail always spoke as if truth were something to be diluted, as if naming harm created it. By afternoon, Martha felt the resistance openly. Conversation stopped when she approached. A man she'd known for years met her eyes and then looked past her. At the well, she heard her name spoken with caution. "She's saying things." One woman murmured, "She always has." Another replied, "Yes, but now it sounds like judgment." Martha stepped forward. "It is judgment," she said. "We're allowed that much." The women startled. One recovered quickly. "Not when it tears us apart." "What tears us apart?" Martha said, "is pretending everything is fine while we whisper behind doors." A man set his bucket down harder than necessary. "You're talking about Eliza Hartwell." "I'm talking about propriety," Martha said. "And who decides that?" he asked. Martha held his gaze. "We do. We always have." He laughed once, short and unpleasant. "Funny. Feels like someone else has been deciding a lot lately." That stung more than she expected. She turned away without responding. As evening came on, Martha walked past the store again. She saw Eliza inside, moving quietly. Folding cloth, she saw the way a customer's eyes lingered, then slid away. For a moment, something like doubt stirred, not about what she believed, but about the shape it had taken once it left her mouth. She pushed it aside. Doubt was a luxury for times of stability. That night, Martha sat at her table and wrote a list of names, not accusations, observations. Who spoke? Who didn't? Who avoided her? Who agreed too quickly? By the time she finished, the list was longer than she liked. The next morning, Jonas Pike's man nodded to her in the street, not respectfully, not rudely, as if acknowledging a fixed point. Martha felt a chill she couldn't explain. By noon, Thomas Reed sent word that he wouldn't be attending the informal meeting she'd suggested. Not helpful was the message. Abigail didn't come either. Martha stood on the church steps alone longer than she meant to, watching people pass without stopping. She told herself they were afraid of the truth, not of her. But as the day wore on, she began to understand the cost of speaking with certainty in a town that survived on compromise. She had not drawn the town together. She had given it a reason to step around her. And once a community learned how to do that, it rarely forgot. Silas Boone did not see the night before he decided to act. He lay on his bed staring at the ceiling, counting the slow creaks of the building as it cooled. Each sound reminded him of something left unattended. By morning, he had accepted what he'd been avoiding. Waiting had become a choice, and it was costing him ground. He rose before light and dressed without lighting a lamp. Outside, the town was quiet in the careful way it had learned. He moved through it without greeting anyone, keeping to the edges, letting familiarity serve as cover. At the livery, the younger miner waited with a mule already saddled. His eyes were bright, his movements quick. "You sure?" the young man asked. Silas tightened the cinch. "No bow." That was the most honest answer he had. They rode out along a trail that didn't look like one, unless you knew where to place your feet. The land opened slowly, scrub giving way to rock and dry grass. Silas watched the ground, reading it the way others read faces. When they reached the cut, he dismounted and crouched, peeling back the branches they had laid days ago. The concealment was worse than before. Someone had been careless this time, or confident. The younger miner swore under his breath. "They know." Silas didn't answer. He scraped at the dirt with his boot and uncovered the edge of the seam. It caught the light even under cloud cover, a dull promise that refused to stay hidden. "They're coming," the young man said. "Yes," Silas said. "And if we do nothing, they won't need to hurry." They worked quickly, prying loose what they could carry without tools that would leave obvious marks. Silas kept his movements controlled, deliberate. Each piece he wrapped felt like an admission that secrecy was already failing. As they finished, Silas heard at the distant sound of hooves. "Not close, not yet." He straightened. He said, "What about you?" "I'll cover it." The young man hesitated, then did as he was told. Silas stayed long enough to scatter fresh brush, to kick dirt back into place, to make it look abandoned rather than stripped. By the time he reached the outskirts of town, the sun was high. People were already moving through the streets, the day beginning as if nothing were about to break. Silas went straight to Thomas Reed's store. Thomas looked up as the door opened, took in Silas's face, and frowned. What happened? They know, Silas said. He didn't lower his voice. It didn't matter anymore. Thomas's eyes flicked to the registry, then to the door. You shouldn't say that here. You put my name in a book, Silas said. You already said it here? Thomas's jaw tightened. What do you want? Silas leaned on the counter, feeling the grain of the wood under his palms. I want to move what we can. I want help. Now? Thomas hesitated. That would look like. Like what? Silas cut in. Defiance. Or survival. Before Thomas could answer, the bell rang again. Caleb Moore stepped inside. The room shifted immediately. Even Thomas seemed to straighten without meaning to. Silas turned. You're back, he said. So I hear. Caleb replied. His eyes moved from Silas to Thomas and back again. What's wrong? They've been near the cut, Silas said. More than near. We wait any longer, and they won't need permission. Caleb's jaw set. Who? Silas didn't answer directly. He didn't need to. Thomas spoke instead, quietly. If you move it, they'll say you're hiding things. Silas barked a laugh. They'll say that anyway. Caleb looked between them. How much? Enough to matter. Silas said. Not enough to secure it. Caleb nodded slowly. If you move it, you make it visible. If you don't, you lose it. That's the choice. Silas said. Thomas ran a hand through his hair. If this turns into a fight. It already has, Silas said. It's just been polite so far. Caleb exhaled through his nose. Who else knows? Too many, Silas replied. And the wrong ones. There was a long moment where no one spoke. Outside, a wagon passed. The sound of its wheels felt louder than it should have. Caleb finally said, Do it. Thomas's head snapped up. You can't mean. I do, Caleb said, but not openly. Not fast. We move what we can without calling it a move. Silas watched him closely. And when they notice. Caleb met his gaze. Then they notice I'm back. Thomas looked at both of them, his face drawn. This will undo what little calm we've got. Caleb's voice was steady. Calm built on waiting isn't calm. Silas straightened. I'll need men. Caleb nodded. Choose them carefully. As Silas turned to leave, Thomas caught his arm. If this goes wrong. Silas looked down at Thomas's hand, then back at his face. It already has, he said, and pulled free outside. The town looked unchanged. That was the worst part. The people moving through it didn't yet know they were about to be forced to choose whether the order they'd accepted was worth defending. As Silas walked away, he saw one of Jonas Pike's men standing near the well, watching the store. Their eyes met briefly. The man smiled, just enough to acknowledge that something had shifted. Silas felt a tightness in his chest that had nothing to do with fear. It was the knowledge that the next step would not allow retreat. By choosing to protect the mine, he had chosen to make the conflict visible, and once something became visible, it demanded a response. From everyone. Caleb did not sleep the night the mine was moved. He lay awake listening for sounds that never came, measuring the silence against what he remembered it to mean. When dawn broke, it did so without urgency. That, too, felt wrong. By mid-morning, the town knew something had shifted. Not what, just that the air carried a new weight. Men gathered in twos and threes without calling it a meeting. Women paused longer at doors, listening. Caleb walked the street with his hat on, his hands visible. He did not go to the cut. He did not check on Silas. If he did, it would turn a quiet decision into a declaration. Jonas Pike stood near the church, speaking with one of his men. He turned as Caleb approached, as if he'd expected it. Mr. Moore, Jonas said, back among us. Caleb stopped a few paces away. You've been busy. Jonas smiled faintly. So have you. Caleb glanced at the notices still nailed to the church door. Your men have been watching the wrong places. Jonas followed his gaze. Watching is never wrong, he said. Only incomplete. They stood there, the space between them carefully maintained. No one else lingered close enough to overhear. But enough people slowed to watch that the moment acquired an audience. There's been movement, Jonas said. Resources don't move without reason. Caleb's expression didn't change. People adjust when pressure's applied. Jonas nodded. They do. And adjustments tell us where pressure belongs. Caleb felt the familiar pull to escalate, to force the moment into clarity. He resisted it, Clarity, here, would mean blood. You have no claim. Caleb said instead. Jonas's eyes sharpened slightly. Claim is established by administration. Administration doesn't dig. Caleb replied, men do. Jonas studied him. Men make mistakes. Administration corrects them. Caleb almost laughed. Almost. You don't correct mistakes, he said. You wait for them to cost enough. Jonas's smile faded. You misunderstand me. No, Caleb said. I understand you fine. The pause stretched. Finally, Jonas spoke again, voice calm. Your town has avoided trouble by cooperation. By accepting help. Caleb nodded once. It's avoided trouble by standing still. Jonas's gaze drifted to the store, where Thomas Reed stood just inside the doorway, watching without appearing to, standing still. Jonas said, only works until someone decides to move. That someone won't be you, Caleb said. Jonas met his eyes. You're certain? Caleb felt the truth of that question land. He was not certain, he was committed. Before he could answer, Silas Boone appeared at the far end of the street, walking fast, not running. His coat was dusty. His jaw was set. Jonas noticed him at the same moment. His eyes flicked, calculating. Silas stopped near Caleb. It's done, he said. A's clean as it could be. Caleb nodded. Any trouble? Not yet. Jonas stepped closer. Mr. Boone, he said pleasantly. You look tired. Silas didn't reply. Jonas continued. You understand that unregistered movement of resources invites scrutiny. Silas's mouth twisted. Everything invites scrutiny now. Jonas's gaze moved between the two men. Then we should proceed formally. Caleb's voice was steady. There's nothing formal left to proceed with. Jonas's expression hardened a fraction. Careful. Caleb felt the weight of every eye in the street settle on him. This was the point where he could draw a line so clear it could only be crossed with force. It would feel like victory. It would not end well. Instead, he said, You've had your time. Jonas's eyebrows rose slightly. Excuse me? You came in quietly, Caleb said. You removed a man. You installed procedures. You watched to see who bent. That time is over. Jonas studied him. And what replaces it? Caleb looked down the street. At the faces watching from doorways and porches, he saw Thomas Reed's careful stillness. He saw Martha Doyle standing apart, her posture rigid. He saw Eliza's silhouette at the upstairs window, unmoving, nothing clean. Caleb said, Nothing that fits on paper. Jonas let out a breath that might have been a laugh. That's not an answer. It's the only honest one. Caleb replied. The silence that followed was broken by the sound of boots. One of Jonas's men shifted position, a hand resting where it shouldn't. Caleb noticed. So did Silas. Jonas raised a hand slightly, not a command, but a suggestion. The man stilled. Jonas looked back at Caleb. You've made things difficult. Caleb nodded. That was always going to happen. Jonas considered him a moment longer, then stepped back. We will review, he said. We will account. We will respond. Caleb held his gaze. You'll think twice. Jonas smiled thinly, perhaps. He turned and walked away, his men falling in without haste. The street exhaled as if it had been holding breath. Conversations did not resume. People drifted, uncertain what they just witnessed. Silas spoke first. That won't hold. Caleb nodded. No. Thomas came out of the store then, his face pale. You've done it now. Caleb looked at him. It was already done. Thomas swallowed. They'll come back. Yes, Caleb said. But not like before. As the crowd thinned, Caleb became aware of the cost settling in. Jonas Pike had not been defeated. He had been checked. That was different, and more dangerous. That evening, Caleb stood alone behind the store, washing his hands in a barrel of cold water. He scrubbed until the skin burned. He had kept the town from being taken cleanly. What he had not done was make it whole again. When he went upstairs, Eliza was waiting. She didn't ask what had happened. She saw it in his face. It's quieter, she said. For now, Caleb replied. They sat together without touching, listening to the town adjust around them. Caleb understood then that whatever he had preserved had been altered by the preserving. The threat had pulled back, but it had not gone, and neither had the damage. The morning after Jonas Pike left town, the street looked the same. The notices still hung on the church door. The registry remained on Thomas Reed's counter, its pages creased and smudged from use. No one hurried to take them down. No one asked whether they were still in effect. Eliza noticed these things because she had learned to notice what stayed. She stood at the window upstairs and watched a wagon pass through without stopping. Dust rose, settled, and was gone. The sound of wheels faded into the land as if it had never mattered. Caleb was already awake. He sat on the edge of the bed, boots on, hands resting on his knees. He looked smaller that way, folded inward instead of standing where people expected him. "They won't come back today," he said. Eliza nodded. "Today is a long way off." He didn't argue. He stood and pulled on his coat. "I'll be around." She watched him go down the stairs. She did not follow immediately. She had learned the difference between being present and being seen. Down in the store, Thomas was already open. He greeted Caleb with a nod that held relief and distance at the same time. They spoke quietly about inventory, about repairs that needed doing, not about authority, not about who decided what now. The registry stayed where it was. When Eliza came down, a woman stood at the counter buying flour. She glanced at Eliza, then back at Thomas, then paid and left without comment. It was not kindness. It was something flatter than that. By midday, the town had settled into a version of itself that did not require explanation. Men worked, women traded, children ran until they were called back sharply, as if sound itself had become suspect. At the well, two women spoke in low voices and stopped when Eliza approached. One of them nodded stiffly. "You staying on?" the woman asked. Eliza answered evenly, "Yes." The woman hesitated. Things should be quieter now. Eliza looked at the bucket, at the way the rope darkened, where hands had worn it smooth. Quieter doesn't mean simple. The woman gave a tight smile and turned away. In the afternoon, Martha Doyle passed Eliza on the street. They did not stop. Martha inclined her head slightly, a gesture that could be read several ways. Eliza returned it because not returning it would be read more narrowly. Abigail Cross came by the store near evening. She stood with Eliza by the stove, both of them facing the same direction. "People are asking fewer questions," Abigail said. "For now." Eliza replied. Abigail glanced at her. "That's not nothing." "No," Eliza said. "But it isn't trust either." Abigail sighed. "No." When the store closed, Caleb and Eliza at upstairs. The food was simple. The silence wasn't. Afterward, Caleb spoke without looking at her. "We can set a date." Eliza felt the words land not as a promise, but as a proposal weighed down by circumstance. "We could," she said. He waited. She continued. "People will watch." "They already do." "Yes," she said. "But they'll watch differently." Caleb nodded slowly. "I know." She studied his face. The doubt was there, not loud, not accusatory. It sat behind his eyes like a question he did not know how to phrase without damaging the answer. She did not offer reassurance. Reassurance, she had learned, asked the other person to stop feeling something they hadn't chosen. Later, they walked outside together. The night was clear. The town lay quiet. Not asleep so much as holding itself still. At the edge of the street, they stopped. The land beyond waited indifferent. Caleb spoke first. "They took me because it was easy." Eliza said. "They watched you because you were here." "Wes." "They used both." "Yes." He nodded. "I don't know how to fix that." Eliza looked at him. "I don't think it fixes." They stood a moment longer. Somewhere, a door closed. Somewhere else, a board creaked. When they went back inside, Eliza paused at the window once more. The upstairs room across the street was dark. No one stood under the porch light now. That absence did not feel like safety. It felt like space that could be filled again. In the days that followed, the town adjusted its memory. Jonas Pike became something people spoke of as past. Even though nothing about the systems he'd set in place had been fully undone, Caleb's return became something people referenced selectively, emphasizing either his presence or his absence, depending on what they needed the story to support. Eliza learned which shops she could enter without conversation stopping, and which she could not. She learned when to speak, and when to let silence do the work. She learned that surviving scrutiny did not mean escaping it. One evening as she folded linens upstairs, she heard laughter from below. It surprised her. It sounded real. She went to the stairs and watched Caleb talking with Thomas, their heads close together, voices low but not tense. For a moment, The shape of a future appeared that did not require constant vigilance. Then the laughter stopped, and the shape dissolved into something less distinct. Eliza returned to her work. The town would go on, so would she, so would Caleb. What they had lost would not be announced. What they had kept would not be pure. When she finally blew out the lamp, Eliza did not tell herself that things were over. She told herself only this: whatever came next would arrive quietly, the way everything important here seemed to. And when it did, it would not ask whether they were ready,